Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Here, I mainly post reviews on literature and books. Though I may gradually create some content related to music and films as well. In Paris during the 1960s, a young Latin American struggling there for survival was in great pain. How much he had dreamed, when he came from Madrid, of furthering his studies in this romantic capital of art and literature. Up to that point, his pursuit of dreams had been relatively successful. In 1957, he was already working as a journalist in his home country, and had even managed to publish a few novellas. A year later, he won a scholarship to study in Madrid. But now, when he thought he could also get a scholarship in Paris, fate played a cruel joke on him. He failed to secure one. Nevertheless, he chose to stay in Paris with his wife and continued writing. This may have been the lowest point in his life. Not only was he penniless, but he also divorced his wife, and several times he considered ending his life. But fate lent him a helping hand. Each time he read the suicide scene in Flaubert's Madame Bovary, he felt deeply uncomfortable, because the writer had described too vividly the agony a person goes through before death. Cowardly as he was, he gave up the idea. Flaubert probably never knew it, but without his book, the world would not have seen the publication of books such as The Time of the Hero, Conversation in the Cathedral, The Feast of the Goat, and so on. And the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2010 might have gone to someone else. Indeed, this man who nearly committed suicide was none other than the world-renowned Peruvian writer Mario Vargas Llosa. Alongside his writing career, he also enjoyed a brilliant political career. His concern with politics and his strong personal opinions influenced many of his works. Today, I will briefly share my impressions on some of his novels. Just like the book I introduced in my last episode, I also read Llosa's novels a long time ago, and since I didn't take notes at the time, in this video I'll limit myself to the works I've read, along with a brief description of their style and themes. Most these contents come from research. Llosa, alongside his arch-rival and fellow Nobel laureate Gabriel Garcia Marquez, writes the Latin American literature that we typically know, rich in heavy and tragic history, violence, and magical realism. They successfully brought Latin American culture to the world, though their Latin American style was still somewhat tailored to European and American tastes. After all, any work of art that hopes to leave a lasting impression must have a clear and distinct style. Therefore, writers who are not from the English-American mainstream literary current often rely on cultural stereotypes in order to conquer a wider audience worldwide. If Marquez's novels blur time and space, move at a slower pace, and exude loneliness, creating works that seem universal, but that are in fact deeply rooted in his Colombian homeland, then many of Llosa's novels are marked by clear settings and time periods, often based on real historical events and figures. His narrative pace is faster, his plots and depictions of violence more gripping. What's more, Llosa didn't only write about his native Peru, he also used his fame and influence to introduce major events and figures from other Latin American countries to readers worldwide. Now, I will introduce three of Llosa's novels in order of publication. These are also the only three of his novels that I have read. The Time of the Hero, or The City and the Dogs, Llosa's first novel, set in Peru just like his early story collection The Leaders. Drawing on his experience in a military academy in the 1950s, Llosa portrays a toxic environment where young cadets lived under harsh discipline and were treated without dignity, humiliation, mockery, and denunciation were part of daily life. One day, some exam papers were stolen, setting off a desperate cycle of suspicion and betrayal in the academy. Under oppressive conditions, human dignity and empathy were completely eroded. The novel uses non-linear narration, beginning with the theft and then tracing back and forward in time. It also shifts among multiple narrative perspectives, inspired by the narration technique in William Faulkner's novel Light in August. The original title was changed at the suggestion of literary friends. The city refers to Lima, where the academy was located, and the dogs refer to the cadets themselves. Dogs could be their nickname, but more profoundly it symbolizes their degraded living conditions, their blind obedience to authority, and the loss of their humanity. If they lost their independent thought and conscience, how would they be different from dogs? The War of the End of the World. This is Llosa's first novel set outside of Peru, and the one he considered as his greatest success. The novel is set in Brazil, during the Canudos War of 1897, which was a peasant uprising against local authorities. The story follows peasants who, after listening to the preaching of a charismatic religious leader, Antonio Conselheiro, were inspired by it and bravely rose up against landlords and officials. Battles were fought repeatedly, with neither side yielding. Although based on real events, Llosa didn't rely on historical records but instead drew primarily inspiration from Brazilian journalist Euclides da Cunha's 1902 work Rebellion in the Backlands. Thus, strictly speaking, it isn't a realist novel, yet it highlights the long-standing oppression, violence, hardships of the common people, and their often futile but courageous resistance, common to many Latin American nations. Thanks to Llosa, this Brazilian civil war gained global recognition. The Feast of the Goat. This time, Llosa set his story in the Dominican Republic, a relatively small country with little international presence. There, General Rafael Trujillo ruled with an iron fist for over 3 decades, brutally repressing the people, while maintaining an image of virility, even in bed. The goat in the title refers to his nickname. The novel again uses non-linear narration with 3 storylines. The first is narrated by Urania, a Dominican woman naturalized in the US, who returns to care for her ailing father and recalls painful memories of her youth. Her father's identity and a long-kept secret are revealed. The second covers Trujillo's final days, also depicting the real lives of the Dominican elite. The third follows Trujillo's assassins, some of whom were once high-ranking government officials. I see this as perhaps Llosa's most politically charged novel, ruthlessly exposing the corruption of the Dominican elite, Trujillo's cult of personality, his manipulative loyalty tests, and his exploitation of women. His machismo pervades both his rule and his private life. Through memory and reconstruction, characters reveal the living conditions of the Dominican population, memories that shaped their actions and altered their lives forever. While figures like Trujillo existed for real in this book, fictional characters like Urania allowed Llosa to weave imagination with history. Although Latin American literature has not left upon me with the deepest personal feelings as some Russian literary masterpieces have, I still found every one of Llosa's novels that I've read to be fascinating, with gripping plots, inventive narration, lesser known historical events that spark curiosity, and his blunt critiques of traditional Latin American values. Llosa spread Latin American culture and history worldwide, while he won over countless readers.